Created by an act of Congress on 4 August 1790 at the request of the first Secretary of the Treasury as a seagoing service of 10 cutters to be employed for the security of the revenue, the Coast Guard was first called the Revenue Marine and then the Revenue Cutter Service. Its merger in 1915 with the U.S. Life-Saving Service brought about the present name of the United States Coast Guard. To these two major life-saving activities was later added the closely related Lighthouse Service. To start our story, we must go back to the early 1830s when many families from the eastern states were moving into what is now Wisconsin. The first settlers to reach Washington Island, Simmons Island today, and the crescent-shaped mouth of Pike Creek founded the settlement that was later to be called Kenosha. The adverse land conditions at that time made traveling overland difficult, so that soon more and more settlers and merchandise began to arrive by sailing ships. It was soon found necessary to have some type of a beacon to guide the ship navigators on Lake Michigan to Kenosha, known as Pike Creek at that time, and so this beacon was constructed in 1836 on the bank of the lake. The beacon itself consisted of a large oak tree cut down so as to leave the stump 10 feet high. On top of this stump was put a layer of stones, and on this foundation a fire of wood was kindled every evening at sundown during the season of navigation. In 1840, an improved lighthouse was built by subscription, costing $60. It consisted of 4 posts, 24 feet high, on the top of which was placed a sash lantern, 3 feet square. This structure was used until the permanent government lighthouse was built. By 1850, there was considerable activity in the harbor. And this commercial water traffic was the basis for building the government lighthouse in 1866. By 1870, both steam and sail vessels hauled lumber and coal to Kenosha. The tug business was also a very lucrative business at the time, as all vessels had to be towed to landing places. The in and out of a large coal barge ran as high as $700 or $800. For this reason, Kenosha Harbor had numbers of these tugs in port most of the time. Sailing fishing boats, like the one shown here, sailing out of the harbor, were also very busy, and the Smith brothers, who ran 2 such boats, brought in 40,000 fish in one day, the largest haul known up to that time. Kenosha had by now become an important commercial harbor. On April 8, 1874, 8 men manning 2 fishing boats, such as shown here, were engaged in fishing about a mile offshore. The weather was calm, and the men went about their work as usual. Suddenly, a gale arose, and the waves lashed the small boats, wrenching them from the control of the men. Within a few minutes, both boats were capsized, and all the men were drowned. Watchers on the shore could see the men clinging frantically to the capsized boats, but they were helpless to aid. This tragedy and the increasing loss of other vessels offshore brought home to the local people of the need for a life-saving station in Kenosha. On July 25, 1878, the government designated Kenosha a port for the construction of a life-saving station. This was 4 years after the tragedy of the 8 fishermen. Kenosha's first life-saving station was built in 1879. A local newspaper, the Kenosha Democrat, on November 22, 1879, described the new station, a pretty structure on the island, which to the observer looks like a cross between an English cottage and a barn, is one of the first objects that strikes the eye of a visitor to the harbor. To the majority of our citizens, this pleasant-looking little building with its red roof and dormer windows is now well known as the life-saving station. It is a 7-room building and is neatly finished inside with light and dark woods. It comprises a mess room, pantry, and boathouse on the first floor, hospital and dormitories on the second floor, while the cost, according to contract, was $1,850. A platform 80 feet in length by 20 feet in width on strong pilings leads from the waterfront to the harbor. The equipment consists of 1 lifeboat, seen on boat ramp, 1 surf boat in boathouse, and a life car, seen secured above the surf boat in the boathouse. Other equipment consists of a beach motor for shooting lines from shore to stranded ships and other beach rescue gear. The crew, which will not be selected until spring, will comprise a commander and 4 seamen who are to serve for 8 months each year, and during the period of service will be entitled to compensation at the rate of $40 per month for the men and $400 per year for the commander." End quote. Benjamin G. Cameron was commissioned October 25, 1879, as the first captain of Kenosha's life-saving station. The crew consisted of 8 men and himself. Captain Cameron was born at St. John's, New Brunswick, December 17, 1839. He retired from the service December 24, 1907, and died in Kenosha December 2, 1919. Captain Cameron was an outstanding man and a distinguished life-saver. In 1899, the U.S. government awarded Captain Cameron a pure silver medal for gallant conduct in saving lives from shipwreck on various occasions, 1875, 1897, a period of 20 years of gallant service. The first lifeboat at the Kenosha Life-Saving Station was powered strictly by Armstrong engines, that is, bent backs and oars. Here we see the working or practice lifeboat. It is interesting to note here that the Kenosha Life-Saving Station received the first motor-driven life-saving boat on Lake Michigan on May 30th, 1907. It came 10 years too late for these lifesavers. It took skillful, daring surfmen to man life-saving stations. Constant boat drills kept crews fit for rescue of lives from shipwrecks, capsized boats, and other offshore distresses. Here, the Kenosha crew of 1897 rolls the lifeboat over during a training exercise in the Kenosha Harbor. By 1884, the Kenosha Harbor had been defined by breakwaters, dredged, and lined with docks. At the left is the life-saving station as built in 1879. Just to the left of center is the brick lighthouse and Light Keeper's residence, built in 1866. Right of center is the North Pier, where the main entrance light is now located. At the lower end of the North Pier, at the corner, is now where the Kenosha Yacht Club is located. On Decoration Day, May 30th, 1900, the U.S. revenue cutter Fessenden was ordered to proceed to Kenosha from Detroit to take part in the celebration of the dedication of the Simmons Library and the unveiling of the Soldiers' Monument in Library Park. As you can see, the Fessenden is of the sidewheel type. Her hull is steel-plated, and she is rigged in full holiday dress with international code flags hoisted. Although the revenue cutter's main duty was to collect revenue from shippers entering the United States by ship, they also patrolled off the coasts, rendering assistance to any vessel in distress. The revenue cutter service officers also formulated the plans for drills and discipline of the life-saving station crews and conducted frequent station inspections. By 1911, when this photograph was taken, life-saving crews were professional men. They were men who gave their strength, sometimes their lives, that others may go on living. They knew how the surf looked from seaward and could pull their weight in a boat. Another duty of the lifesavers, by now known as surfmen, was walking the beach patrol. The Kenosha crew patrolled the shoreline to the north and south of the station, watching for signs of ships in distress. The method used in Kenosha, where the shoreline was not continuous, was to carry a time clock which was activated by a key on a patrol post at the outer end of the patrol. If he saw a ship heading into danger, the patrol fired a red flare as a warning. If the ship grounded, he lighted a Coston light as a sign that help would be coming, a cheering sight for a ship in distress. The 2 surfmen shown here in 1900 are starting on beach patrol armed with lanterns and dressed in sou'westers. The oilskin jackets, trousers, and high boots typify the foul weather gear worn by crews at early life-saving stations. By the way, this patrol post, once mounted at 71st Street and 2nd Avenue, is now at the grounds of the Kenosha County Historical Society. Depending on the need, the lifesavers might use a boat on a carriage pulled at first by horses, later by tractor to the nearest place on the beach, or if a surf boat could not be launched from shore, the surfmen used the life car for rescue. The life car was a tubular iron boat with pointed ends and a watertight hatch. Hauled back and forth along a line shot out between a wrecked ship and the shore by a mortar, tumbled about and submerged in the surf, it gave the persons sealed inside a very rough voyage. Nonetheless, many a survivor crawled out who otherwise would have drowned. Or if the surf was too dangerous and the vessel was stranded close to the land, they would bring a beach apparatus cart with a 200-pound cannon-like instrument called a Lyle gun. The Lyle gun was capable of firing an 18-inch projectile attached to a shot line having a range of 500 yards. To the shot line was attached a whip line that would be used for hauling a breeches buoy out to the stranded vessel. The survivors, one by one, would then be pulled ashore by the surfmen. Time marched on, and about 1918, the Kenosha station acquired its first motor lifeboat, the first on Lake Michigan. The station's boathouse was widened to the right to handle the new engine-powered, heavier lifeboat. To carry the new lifeboat's weight, the boathouse track was also widened and a third rail added to support the keel. The lighter pulling surfboat was put on a track with a crossover rail. In 1915, by an act of Congress, the U.S. Life-Saving Service and the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service merged to become the United States Coast Guard. However, the surfmen kept their distinctive insignia on their uniforms, although the uniforms themselves changed to typical World War I type. The influence of the seagoing cuttermen was seen in the uniforms by this time, as surfmen also went to sea during World War I. World War I also brought a greater military bearing to the crews of the lifeboat stations. Surfmen at the Kenosha station, like sailors everywhere, stopped work to have a snapshot taken in their new uniforms for the folks back home. However, war or no war, the work at the station continues. Here, a motor machinist at the Kenosha station is changing the shaft of the motor lifeboat as his buddies pose for another snapshot for the folks back home. And as always, a sailor holds a certain fascination for the young ladies. And on occasion, they came to the station for a visit. After World War I, surfmen at the Kenosha station concentrated their skills on life-saving procedures that had become part of the service due to improvement of methods and boats developed during the war. In 1920, the General Service Boat was now a 26-foot surf boat, not the heavy lifeboat of 1897. Of course, some things did not change a whole lot. For example, the surfmen of 1920 still were required to pull the surfboat over and right it in the water. By 1918, the powered lifeboat had come into its own and was a reliable unit of the lifeboat station. These early E-class lifeboats kept a full suit of sails and oars as well. One way or another, the surfmen would be able to get out to the assistance of a vessel in distress. By 1933, the E-class lifeboat was the basic rescue boat and was further developed by having the rudder below the waterline and the tiller for steering mounted inboard. This is a photograph of the last modification of the famous 36-foot Class E motor lifeboat, as used in the Kenosha station before being phased out by the 30 and 40-foot utility boats. By early 1934, the old original station had lived past its time. The life-saving boats were getting bigger and the quarters were too small to handle the progress being made in the Coast Guard. So down she came, and the old Coast Guard in Kenosha passed into history. In 1934, the present Coast Guard station was built on the same location as the old station. On November 11th, 1934, it was placed into service. The large pieces of equipment now consisted of one motor-driven lifeboat, one motor-driven self-bailing beach boat, one motor-driven speedboat, a Chris-Craft, one oar-propelled self-bailing beach boat used for drilling and other purposes, and even a 2.5-ton Diamond T truck for transporting equipment by land. However, commercial harbor traffic had dwindled during the 1930s, and by 1937, the Kenosha Harbor's main activity was fishing tugs and private boats. Even though the commercial traffic in the Kenosha Harbor trickled down to mainly local fish tugs, the lake would still kick up and roll in, bringing disaster to the unwary. The Coast Guard continued to maintain a 24-hour watch of the lake in the lookout tower built on the North Pier. Rescue work went on summer and winter, although not everyone could be saved. Large steamships like the SS Wisconsin, late of the part of Kenosha, would succumb to the fury of the lake and go down in heavy seas. Kenosha surfmen went out to rescue the survivors and bring in the dead. Other duties called the Kenosha Station personnel and boats to the great Mississippi River flood of May 1937. Loading their boats on flat cars, the Kenosha Station personnel pulled many underway hours in the flood zone. During these years, the boats and rescue gear of the Coast Guard steadily improved. This surfboat was used at the Coast Guard station in 1938. It is of the self-bailing pulling type and was manned by a crew of 8 oarsmen. The boat is mounted on an improved trailer that now has air brakes. The trailer was usually drawn by a tractor, and the tires were very large, so they would pull the trailer through deep and loose sand. The boat could be unloaded and ready to go in about 2 minutes. Also during these years of the 1930s, the queen of the Coast Guard cutters in Lake Michigan and a visitor to Kenosha was the cutter Escanaba. Many fishing boats were rescued from heavy ice flows in fall and winter storms. Harbors like Kenosha cleared for traffic in cold winters, and patrols were maintained during the big regattas and sailing races by the cutter. Her last role as a lifesaver was the rescue of 132 men from a torpedoed transit on the Atlantic during the winter of 1942. Struck by a deadly missile, probably a torpedo, on June 13, 1943, she disappeared in the waters of the North Atlantic within a very few minutes. There was a loss of 101 men, the whole crew, except for 2 survivors. With the loss of the cutter Escanaba during World War II, a new cutter was built to take her duties on the lakes. Today, the cutter Mackinac sails the lakes and has yet to be stopped by Mother Nature in the worst of ice conditions on the lakes. Like the Escanaba, she also carries out Coast Guard missions such as boardings, law enforcement, and search and rescue. Normal functions continued at the station during World War II, although somewhat modified. Many Coast Guardsmen passed through the Kenosha station, completed basic training, and went to sea. 1946, and the station again went back to its peacetime mission. The pulling surfboat, the sail-driven lifeboat, and the workhorse, the 36-footer, gave way to the 30- and 40-foot steel utility boats. Today, as in the past, the Kenosha station goes about its mission, assisting boats in distress and making rescues occasionally under adverse conditions. The 1970s brought in the newest addition to the rescue capabilities of the Kenosha station. The 41-foot utility boat has a top speed of 22 knots compared to the 7 knots of the first motor lifeboat. Its fuel capacity allows for many more hours of search and rescue, and it has firefighting capabilities. Station personnel engage in continuous drills and training exercises to perfect their skills so that when called upon, they can perform with assured competence. Equipment, particularly the boats, must be ready when needed. And the station personnel take special care of their station and all its equipment to ensure the highest degree of operational readiness. This, then, is your Coast Guard, a part of the Kenosha scene for almost 100 years, carrying on the service and tradition of the lifeboat men of yesterday and moving forward to even greater opportunities for service to country and humanity.